welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my second video in my series where I am dissecting Jeffree Star. If you have not already seen the first video in this, I will leave it linked down below. That video ended on the end of Dramageddon number 1, and we were going into 2019, which is where we will pick up in this video here, although first, I would like to add a little bit of clarification from the second video that I don't think came across as well as I wanted it to. Oftentimes when it comes to these sort of more talky, narrated videos, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to make sure you get each and every single one of your points. And it's especially hard to tell while you're filming, so then when I'm editing, I'm like, yeah, that sounded okay, but I kind of wanted to make more of a point than that, and so I wanted to sort of clarify some things that maybe didn't come across as clear as I would have liked in my first video. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, and this is part 2, there is a significant amount to unpack. So, firstly, one thing I wanted to sort of restate or sort of let you all know what my intentions were in the first video when I was talking about Jeffree's dealings with the people around him, you know, Kat Von D, Laura Lee, Manny MUA, that sort of old group of friends, and even the new friends that he'll have later. It's just as relevant with them, but I will talk about it more when I get to them, is that for a long time, Jeffree is sort of made out to be this huge mass manipulator. He is this person who is cunning and deceiving. He's got everybody's numbers. He's got all the dirty secrets. You know, he is only out to get what he can from the people he interacts with on YouTube and in the community. While I do not doubt that that is exactly what happens, I also wanted to say that just because he does it, that does not denote, that should not take away from the fact that everyone around him, in my opinion, used Jeffree Star in the same way that he used them. The theme that I noticed going on through here is sort of the clout chasing, the moral high ground, the attempt to make themselves seem superior. Because I feel like people focus a lot on what he does and the fact that he's so famous and he's so rich, and they're like, oh, well, you know, he's just out here trying to get things from other people so he can get exposure and he can get everyone else was doing the exact same thing. But just because of his reputation and the way that people like to talk about him, sort of the fact that other people are guilty gets canceled out. I have no doubt that Tati, Laura, Manny, Nikita, yeah, Shane, sure, they may have been friends and all that, but do you really think that their association with Jeffree was just innocent friendship? Do you not think that maybe they were trying to get a little bit higher on the totem pole? Do you think that maybe they didn't manipulate the situations to make it seem more in their favor? I am not a big fancy beauty YouTuber, but I'm also not stupid. I feel like when you make such a dramatic outcry as Laura and Manny and that whole group did when they called out Jeffree, you don't do something like that to not be seen. So one thing that I really wanted to make clear and to kind of have a stance on is, as much as Jeffree manipulated, people around him were manipulating him as well. Basically what I'm saying is he was used just as much as he was using other people. Doesn't make what he did any better, but I like to think that we can at least be on a level playing field and be realistic, because my opinion, when it comes to people doing Jeffree Star videos or talking about Jeffree Star in any sort of context with other people, sort of everything that he does overshadows any wrongdoing they may have done. He becomes the evil one. And in many ways, he has been a villain in multiple situations. But that doesn't mean the things that other people have done around him are any less heinous. And I feel like we need to hold other people accountable. And if we're holding him accountable for every single little teeny tiny thing he's done, I feel that same level of passion, that same level of persecution should also be implied and looked into the other players as well. Do you think Kat really was thinking that she was going to come out as the wrong person when she called out Jeffree? No. She did it. She did it in a public way. She attempted to snatch a moral high ground, which then sort of turned around and bit her in the butt. What I'm saying is these people are not stupid. These people are grown adults. They're not children tweeting out random things. They're not making Facebook posts. No, they're adults. Full grown people who know what they're doing and who have done a lot of things that get overlooked just for the sake of Jeffree Star being worse. Kind of in the same vein that like when someone comes to you and it's like, hey, I worked 12 hours and someone's like, well, I worked 26 hours without any sleep, you know. Just because someone did something more than you doesn't negate the person being tired for having worked less than you. I feel that also works with just because Jeffree's transgressions are worse does not negate the things that have been done by other people. It was not just him in these situations. It takes two to tango. Thank you very much. I really don't want to make it seem like I'm coming off as someone who's just standing here and defending Jeffree and being like, well, y'all are treating him wrong and whatever. No. I am 110% down with accountability. I'm 110% down with people being called out for the things that they've done. But I'm also 110% down for it being equal. I find it funny that as much as people hate Jeffree Star and Laura Lee and everything like that, people don't hold a grudge against Manny MUA, who, while nowhere near as problematic as the other two, has had some questionable behavior, but for some reason, he's been allowed to move on when there are other creators that for some reason don't get that same sort of courtesy to show growth and development. Basically, if we're going to crucify someone with a certain amount of passion, I feel we should have that same level of dedication to everyone else who's done it. You don't just get to do it to the person you hate. And this is coming from someone who used to despise Manny MUA. I was not a fan at all, and now he has one of my absolute favorite brands on the market. I really just want to talk about things subjectively, because one thing that I feel is missed in this whole Jeffree Star beauty community, all the dramageddons, one thing that we seem to forget is it's not just one person causing this. We like focusing on the one person because, I mean, let's be real, he's involved in, you know, everything. But there are other players involved as well, and there really isn't an entire amount of innocence, although I will say when it comes to the accusations that were placed against James, that is probably the most case of an actual victim within this situation. Laura, Manny, Nikita, whatever, they weren't victims, you know? They were calling out whatever, and in a certain sense, Jeffree wasn't a victim. If you're gonna say it, then, you know, shut up or put up. But I just wanted to sort of state that again, being I am not here to sit here and condemn and whatever and crucify one person. I am trying to look at this and look at all the faults, because there's a lot more on this than just one simplistic layer. There are a lot of different things going into the situation that made it what it was. All right. And with that being said, let's go into 2019. I will say that this video specifically is going to be including a lot of information that's not just about Jeffree. For this being a video about Jeffree Star, I talk about a lot of other people because there's so much context behind everything. You can't just focus on one specific person. Yes, I'm talking about Jeffree, but there are the other people that are involved in this same situation that help make it what it is. I feel that it goes without saying that 2019 was the peak of Jeffree Star as well as the beginning of the end. It would be within this year and the following one when tides would switch, groups becoming even more divided, an absolute shiz show of drama, betrayal, and half-truths. But it did not start off like that. Just a few unproblematic releases such as Blue Blood, the glosses, concealers, and setting powders, items that I had purchased and reviewed on my channel, and it seemed that there was very little that could actually stop the massive tidal wave that was Jeffree Star Cosmetics. The brightly colored Jawbreaker collection released and was exceptionally well received with the first of his mini palettes, which people appreciated because you could purchase a palette without blowing a huge amount of money compared to the other $50 and up palettes. He was making these changes that worked really well for his company. If you're thinking about consistency, say what you will, I do believe that Jeffree Star has had one of the most consistent brands on the market. Now, I will admit, it has not come without his hiccups. If we recall some of the things where people found ants in their packaging, there were a couple things with hair found in them. I know that there were some issues with the mini orgy palette, that all shimmer palette that had issues. You know, the man and the company is not without their sort of faults going in on this and some quality control. But for the most part, I feel compared to, say, Too Faced, especially compared to how KVD was at this point in time, where it was really floundering, really inconsistent, compared to a lot of those mainstream Sephora and Ulta brands. He was doing something different. He created wonderful formulas. He created a fantastic aesthetic, and he had created this on the backbone of consistency. I feel like after Blood Sugar happened, that really was the choo-choo train that took him into one of the top tiers of quality control. Fantastic formulas, unique color stories, consistent quality control, and still producing those cutting edge and alternative leaning products that cut Kat Von D to the core. He was proving, after all her accusations and slander, that he could produce better products. And that is a statement that I fully believe in and will stand by. And that is that he really did overcome Kat. There was a point, I mean, we all remember her Metal Crush highlighters that I still own because I have issues with getting rid of things I spent my money on. But when he released his Extreme Frost, was it Supreme? I think it was the Supreme Frosts. And I got my hand on that. Basically, it was a fantastically better formulated than the KVD one. Because you had the Jeffree Star Supreme Extreme Supreme Frost, and you had the KVD Metal Crush ones. The Kat Von D one was really sad, and then Jeffree took that idea and jacked it to Jesus. So, things were going well. Jeffree had a freakishly established quality control. Not only that, he was established as a company whose products always sold out. As someone who tried her hardest and her darndest to get a hold of everything he released so I could review that shiz on my channel, I could account you with so many stories of headaches and frustration and weeping and wailing as I tried to get this shiz. I believe it was the Blue Blood collection where I was on Jeffree's site and it was just, thank you for your patronage. I'm like, thank me after you take my money and give me my shiz. And I can't remember, I think it was my good friend Jessica who was like, they got that shiz on Beautylish. And I was like, they got that shiz on Beautylish. And ever since then, that was the only place that I bought his cosmetics from. I rued the days where something was exclusive to his site, because for someone who has as much money as he does and who makes as much money, you'd think he could invest some of that capital into a website that didn't constantly crash. This is getting a little ahead of myself, but if I manage to purchase the Conspiracy collection products off of Beautylish within like 1 minute, and I couldn't purchase the cremated palette on his site, I mean, there is a distinct difference there. It was sad. But amidst all of that, like I said, his stuff was selling out like hotcakes. It seemed that every new product he released was something that people ended up wanting. He had a die-hard, near cult-like following. I mean, you had the people who hated him, and then the people who loved him were just as bad. Like it was, you said anything bad about him, it's like, well, he's the savior of the beauty community. And I'm like, he's more like the Antichrist, but we'll get into that later. But what it means is that there was a constant supply of people who wanted his stuff. And not only who wanted his stuff, was willing to buy it. One thing that really, when the Jawbreaker stuff came out, I purchased a fair amount of that collection to do a giveaway. Everything hit the fan. I was like, oh, I don't feel good using this stuff in a giveaway. So I sold it on Mercari. Within 5 days of that stuff being put up on my Mercari, it was gone. And that was sort of this thing where it was like, okay, all right, you know, people were hating on it, people were whatever, people were still continuously buying his cosmetics, which I feel at the time gave him sort of a sense of untouchableness. I don't think Jeffree could ever fathom a day where he wasn't making bank, where his products weren't absolutely raved about. You know, he had too high of a opinion of himself and his cosmetics. And while he did have really good quality control, it's important to stay humble, because when something does happen, you need to be able to take it in stride rather than taking it and throwing it back at the consumers. I understand that you're a self-made businessman, Mr. Star, but at the same time, the consumers who are paying for your brand new, what was it? Was it a Rolls Royce the dude got? You know, it was my money that I was spending on these products that helped you get your things. So, we're sitting in a pretty, I would say at this point, I mean, we did have the divide of people, those who liked him, those who didn't like him. At that point, I was sort of really struggling with my relationship with the brand, because it was kind of the same issue that happened with me and Kat Von D, where I was a huge end-all, be-all, KVD, y'all can remember. I reviewed every palette, everything that company came out with, and then it reached this point, it reached this head where not only was the quality slipping, but sort of more importantly, the morals of the owners behind the company were revealed. And that is one of the things that kind of came into this, where we couldn't separate the company from the owner. And that's a difficult thing when you have brands that are so face-based on the people who've started them. You know, Kat Von D is Kat Von D, or was. And Jeffree Star is Jeffree Star Cosmetics, you know, because the image was so emblazoned and so ingrained into every aspect of their company, it was really kind of difficult to take a step back and look at the makeup subjectively. And I do feel this is my retrospective whateverness thinking about this now. I find one thing that's interesting is when Kat initially called out Jeffree, he ended up coming out on top, I feel. I feel like in the area of social consequences, she kind of got the short end of the stick, where he was able to kind of play it off and then move forward stronger and with kind of a higher moral ground. But then at the same time, Kat's brand suffered a significant amount of deterioration while his was flourishing. And in that, her brand was suffering from the direct result of her actions online. And that's really, I feel, when people super started, I'm sure it was a thing before, but from my experience and my limited whatever, when Kat came out with the anti-vax thing and everything started coming up about her, that was when people really started to take a hard edge stance on holding brand owners accountable and also completely boycotting because of their behaviors. Now, I do personally have a kind of, I'm just a little bit torn on the whole idea of complete boycotting, because yes, you're taking money away from the brand owner's pocket, but you're also taking money and positions away from all of those people underneath them. Despite them being the absolute face of their company, they are not the entirety of that industry. They have people who are working for them, people who are under them. It's sort of sad. It's sort of like the same trickle-down effect where people are like, oh, well, shoplifting isn't a bad thing. I'm just sticking it to the man. The CEO of Walmart couldn't give a flying diddly but what about you stealing whatever from Walmart. The people who care are the people who then have to write up that something was stolen while they were on their shift, which will then reflect negatively on them and causes people being fired and let go as a result of this person giving the middle finger to the big CEO, when in reality, that's not the person who's being affected by what they're doing. It is important, so important to vote with our dollar, but it is also important to think. It's kind of also in the same vein, I'm sorry, I'm going off a little bit, but kind of in the same vein of vegans who are like, oh, don't do animal products or whatever, and then a lot of the things that they purchase and a lot of things that they advocate, yeah, they're not harming animals, but what about those poorer countries and those children working to make those non-animal products? It's great that you're thinking about the animals and stuff, but sort of take that same initiative that you have with the knowledge about that and think about where that energy is then going. All right, put that aside. He's chugging along. He's doing really great. For now, we should probably discuss one of the largest PR stunts / campaigns that the beauty community has ever seen. And it is important to remember that viewing these events in hindsight make it so much easier to dissect them and examine their meaning than when it all was originally released. And this would also teach us the significance of public opinion and how it can sway so many people. At this point, amidst all these releases, he'd started to have a more developed relationship with Shane and Tati Westbrook. He'd really moved on from the Laura Lee and the Manny MUA. And although he didn't have them as friends, he really just shifted. And I feel like also when he shifted his friendships to Shane and Tati, I think there was sort of a feeling that he'd begun to associate himself with more mature people, more grounded people. Because I feel like when he was hanging out with them other people, they were kind of like the problematic. They were the ones that, they had drama left and right. They were always getting up to stuff. Whereas Shane currently was still kind of the unabashed, sweet, cute little true boy from YouTube past, and Tati definitely was someone who did not get into drama. She had recently, with the whole vitamin situation, oh wait, we hadn't hit that yet, got ahead of myself, and he had also started associating with James Charles. Now, one thing I would like to interject about Jeffree's relationship with James, this is purely my speculation, me looking at this and talking about it in a non-professional, unlicensed way. And that is that when I feel like when Jeffree started to associate with James, when he really started to kind of create that relationship, there was a scene in one of the episodes of Shane's docuseries where they were in the warehouse and Jeffree was talking about all the merchandise and all the whatever. And he was like, yeah, and James Charles, Sisters merch is done here. And he spoke about him very fondly. It was like, he's kind of like, a little brother to me. I'm really proud of him and really happy to see him succeed. I mean, when I saw that, the whole drama thing had happened and like weird. And I was like, did they forgive each other? What happened? I remember messaging my friend Morgan and being like, is everything okay? And then I realized the series had been filmed pre-Vitamin Dramageddon 2. But one thing that sort of came out to me that I don't know if it appeared to anyone else, and maybe I'm just, shooting one off the wall. I think that Jeffree may have gone into that relationship because you have to remember James, when he came on to the scene, was very young. He was very young when Dramageddon 2 happened. He was under 20 years old. If I think about me being, under 20 years old and how kind of, not necessarily fully developed I was, it gives a little bit more context, I feel, for something we may have missed. Because when we see someone successful as a celebrity, we kind of don't think about their age. Like there are all these like famous TikTokers and there are a bunch of YouTubers that are literal children, and we don't stop to think that they're children. James was a child. And I think that Jeffree saw him as sort of, I hesitate to say opportunity, but I think he may have gone into it thinking that he could potentially manipulate James more, shape him more, and maybe even potentially create sort of a mini-me. Because I feel that part of the reason Jeffree ended up doing his thing with James is that he wasn't getting as much back out of the relationship as he was used to from other people. I mean, say what you will about James, but he was out there doing his own thing, blazing his own trails. After getting to where he was, he didn't really need someone to bolster him up. But I do think that Jeffree sort of saw an opportunity of someone who was young, kind of impressionable, to where he could make it beneficial to himself. Because let's be quite frank, I do believe that Jeffree is that sort of person. While I also do believe that he is someone who, to his friends who are loyal to his friends, who he receives whatever from, he's very good to them as well. But at that same token, when things start shifting a little bit and they don't favor him as much, that's when he does the disconnect. That's when he's like, I'm gonna come out, I'm gonna ruin you. You didn't do things in accordance to how I wanted them to happen. Now I hate you. That's just sort of my 2-cent observation on kind of the beginning of James and Jeffree's relationship. Because clearly it wasn't a huge, deep relationship. I'm not sure how deep of a relationship a 35-year-old can have with a 20-year-old. Because like I said, one thing I think that gets overlooked a lot in this instance is James' age in comparison to the other players in this whole situation. So here we have it. Jeffree and Shane, 2 huge figures on YouTube as well as just on social media as a whole. At this point in time, a lot of people knew Shane. I watched Shane when I was like freaking 15. But a lot of the new blood to YouTube knew him for his documentaries, knew him for his in-depth conspiracy theories content. You know, it wasn't so much about the funny skits or the the song parodies. You know, he was doing more in-depth, I would say adult, not in the sense of like adult, but the content he was creating now I feel would bring in a older demographic, whereas his previous content, probably the majority of people who were watching him were young teenagers and preteens. So it would seem like the best collaboration when Shane announced that he would be doing a series that would go undercover into the complicated unknown world of who Jeffree Star really was. This was appealing on so many levels and to so many people because at this point, Jeffree still remained a somewhat elusive celebrity. He wasn't someone who expressed himself emotionally. He was someone who constantly had this concrete image. He wasn't someone who showed emotion or delved deep into his thoughts or who he was outside of his company and outside of his YouTube persona. We knew he was rich, had a lot of adorable dogs, and loved designer duds. But a majority of the beauty community viewers had not really seen who Jeffree was beneath all of the glamour and excitement of his hard-earned excessive lifestyle. Who was he really, and where did he come from? Who was the man before blood sugar, and was he really more human than we all had seen? I'm not sure if it's calculated. This is one thing. This is, you know, conspiracy theories. You know, I can't give my full whatever. This is only what I have observed. I don't know if it was a calculated maneuver. That one thing that the series really did was it painted Jeffree as a human being. You know, he wasn't this super rich mogul beauty whateverness. You know, it showed a softer, more human side to who he was. Yeah, it showed the excessiveness. I mean, I lust and long for that man's closet, but it also showed, this actually makes me sad now, but it showed his relationship with, you know, his significant other at the time. And I remember Shane being like, oh wow, I thought that, well, what was his boyfriend's name? Nate. In that video where Nate and Jeffree were doing their thing and Shane was like, oh wow, this is the real thing. This is the real deal. And they were like, yeah, you know, people on the outside like to project and like to interject their thoughts on our relationship when it has nothing to do with money or who I am as a person. You know, and that was very refreshing to see. You know, it was sort of a YouTuber willing to open themselves up beyond, you know, apologies and other things like that. He was a beauty YouTuber who was exposing himself. And I'm sure that won him a lot of sympathy points. And the series would go on to paint Jeffree Star as a very sympathetic person. Someone might call this a portrayal into question because it was made by someone who was his friend and someone who stood to gain a significant amount of views, followers, and exposure for making this series. This is again where I'm coming into a lot of these collaborations, as much as we would like to think that they in their very core are done because of love and done because of interest, a lot of it is done in a sort of exchange kind of way. You know, I collaborate with you, I get a little something, you get a little something, that kind of scenario. It wouldn't benefit him in the long run to show Jeffree with all of his faults out and available for everyone to see. It was a more effective maneuver to display Jeffree as someone who is misunderstood and empathetic, sort of adding credibility to the idea that he was the person who had been so terribly wrong during Dramageddon. We saw someone, once again, who wasn't this character. We saw someone who wasn't conniving and scheming. You know, we saw someone who was really, on the inside, just a person like you and me. He just happened to have a whole crap ton of money and, you know, was living a lavish lifestyle and had his own brand. It was really done in a way, honestly, to make himself as well as Shane seem as absolutely relatable as possible. There's that whole thing with Shane being like, you know, oh, well, we're poor, or where are you? I'm like, yeah, a lot of people in comparison to Jeffree Star is poor, but Shane is most definitely not the level of poor that you or I may happen to be. He's just poor in comparison to someone whose net worth is like 120 million. We saw a much less sassy and opinionated version of Jeffree. Someone we could actually relate to even more than his honest reviews and brand accountability. He wasn't just this manicured figure of a businessman. He had a soul, feelings, and ambitions beyond just makeup. And now, I will admit, there was a scene, probably the scene that affected me the most in this whole series, is when they brought up Jeffree's music, because that hits home for me, because that's how I knew him. And so when they talked about the whole situation about Love to My Cobain and the prom queen song or prom night being released and what that whole happened, I mean, it really made me sad to think that he wasn't able to see his music to fruition. And I feel like also a lot of the, as I say, new blood into the situation sort of don't realize that, yeah, now he's a bougie Louis Vuitton, Hermes toting, you know, whatever person, but he wasn't that. Unlike, you know, Kim and Kylie and all those, you know, the Kardashians, he wasn't born into money. He wasn't born into luxury. He earned it, and he really did. He, like I said, say what you will, the man is a savvy businessman, and he has earned the money that he now makes through hard work and a lot of self-sacrifice. And I understand that doesn't make what he's done any better, but people really like to villainize every single aspect of him. Not just what he's done wrong, but every aspect of his existence. And I feel that isn't fair to anyone. And so, with sympathetic Jeffree established, we barrel on through the series, but not without a very significant hitch. For absolute context, we have got to discuss the tip of the iceberg. In May of 2019, uber popular beauty content creator James Charles decided during his trip to Coachella that he would do a sponsored Snapchat for well-known vitamin and hair nails gummy brand Sugar Bear Hair. I must admit, this is where things are gonna get just a wee bit more scripted, because I've got stuff that I don't want to get wrong. I don't want anyone riding me in the comments and being like, well, you got that wrong. I'm sorry. I don't have a very good memory. This all feels like it happened 10 years ago. I'm sitting here and I'm gonna do my best for you. Now, this in and of itself is not shocking or surprising at all, because YouTube influencers do sponsored posts all the time. It's how people make money. I love how people are like, why do they do sponsored videos? Because it's a job. Because ad revenue ain't what it used to be. And quite frankly, if I'm going to be talking about a something, you know, I would like to be paid for my time and work. It has become the absolute norm despite the systematic stigma it still faces to this day. Is this sponsored? I mean, y'all will know if anything of mine is sponsored, because I'll be like, yo, I can eat this month. I remember just faintly recalling a few short videos or video excerpts discussing this particular bit of drama, and things were pretty divided. We had those who were like, it was just a freaking sponsorship. Some people were like, oh, well, he didn't put hashtag ad in a very visible place, which a lot of the top tier influencers don't do. But it was really like there were these people who were like, oh wow, he really did Tati dirty, because it was known that him and Tati had a very good relationship. She had PR'd the shiz out of him when he did his Morphe thing, and she was like, I'm using this and I'm using this and I love him, you know. And so there was a lot of investment that she had him, and what she figured was probably a kind of mother-son, maybe sister-brother relationship. They weren't what I would consider intellectual peers just because of the age difference. When this happened, James was 20, she was 37. We had people saying that James had done absolutely nothing wrong because it was just a sponsored post. And who is Tati to begrudge her beauty guru's son a bit of sponsorship money? Then there were those who believed he had entirely done Tati dirty and should have thought things through more before he posted the sponsored content. I was pretty much in the middle at this point. I remember watching, at this time I was a lot more invested in watching drama videos than I am now. Nowadays I just couldn't be bothered. But at the time, you know, I watched a couple of videos and I was like, people are really blowing this out of proportion. It's okay. She's a little butthurt that he didn't, you know, that he did a sponsorship about vitamins when she does vitamins. And I admit, maybe I'd be a little bit upset because apparently what James said to her, why he couldn't like showcase her stuff, is because he's like, I have a young audience and I don't want to showcase vitamins. And then he's going to showcase vitamins, especially vitamins. He's talking about, oh, I've had a lot of stress and I've had a lot of anxiety and I need these to sleep. I understand from adult point of view, but if you're thinking that a viewer of his, maybe 11, 12, 13, they don't really have or really need supplements, I feel. Maybe it's just me. Maybe supplements are all the rage in teens and preteens now, but I do kind of understand where he's coming from with his demographic, but then to go around and do the exact same thing with something else, it does seem a little bit probably childish, immature. He's only 20 at this time. He probably honestly didn't even think about it. I don't think that him doing the Sugar Bear ad was really just like, oh, I'm gonna stab one at Tati. I really didn't think he thought it was that deep. He probably thought, okay, these people gave me whatever at Coachella, or I'm doing a sponsored post. That's probably all he thought. He didn't think that it was going to turn into this giant, huge thing. You know, yeah, whatever, James is whatever, but he's also not dumb either. For being so young, you do have to have a certain amount, a business aspect mind, to be able to get to where he has. And of course, we do have to address at this point that Tati did in fact respond publicly, not to James, but she did make a very emotional outcry being like, well, I'm really in a bad place right now. I feel like I've, you know, been betrayed, you know, someone I really knew and loved and trusted, and they've done this awful, terrible thing. You know, she didn't say names, she didn't cite things, but people aren't dumb for the most part, and we're able to draw a conclusion based on the exposure of the situation we'd already had. You know, with drama channels being as on it as they were, this stuff was being reported on as it was happening. Something would happen, an hour later, someone had a video up on it. So in that sense, I feel that Tati did sort of weaponize her image a little bit, because James Charles, for as many people and as many subscribers as he has, a lot of people did have issue with him. For whatever reason. I've never been a fan of his. He grates me just a little bit. But I think that she knew that, or, I mean, I'm sorry. To all these people who are adults, they're not dumb. They know what they're doing. They can look at a situation and think back to other things they've experienced and know and understand that something's going to happen. For their action, there was going to be a reaction. So I don't think it wasn't just an innocent thing that Tati went on and did an emotional whatever. She weaponized her good image to then throw a calculated maneuver at James where she knew she would win that popularity vote. When things first started out with this whole drama, I recall people being a bit more James-sided. When she did release that video, sort of the first initial response was, oh, well, she's, you know, overreacting. It's just It's just vitamins. But then sort of as a little bit of time went on, because you have to understand this happened, I think, in the course of like days to a week, you know, it's not like a month later something popped up. So, you know, people initially, but then as it went on, it kind of shifted and people were like, you know, after Tati came out with her thing, and part of what I think happened, this is me. This is pure speculation. I feel that Tati took stock of the situation. She noticed that people were siding with James and that people were sort of thinking that she had overreacted, that she had kind of taken it too far. It was just some sponsored content. Who was going to begrudge him that? You know, there wasn't anything from his side of the line that made it look like shade, that made it look like a personal affront, that made it look like he was purposefully attacking her or purposefully choosing to take this sponsorship over promoting her products. Although I still think that's a little, yeah. And so when that sort of come to a head, I think that Tati thought, things aren't looking good for me. I need to do something. I need to change the wave. I need to make this look better for me. Because say what you will about friendships, say what you will about relationships, when it comes to being someone who makes as much money as these people and who are such public figures, down at the core is self-preservation. So yes, I do believe that a lot of what Tati did was a lot more calculated than she would have you believe. I feel like she truly wanted to portray and paint herself as the ultimate innocent victim within this situation. And this is just me. I don't know the woman, but I do feel that she aligned herself with whomever she thought would get her in that position the best. Because in this current timeline, she was very much in the Jeffree and Shane wheelhouse. They were the three musketeers, the new holy trinity of the beauty community. And so she had a lot to preserve. We're gonna get a little bit out of this context here. I'm gonna talk a little bit about what happens later. We will go into more depth, but there is sort of some parallels and some points I want to make that have to do with not the Bi Sisters video, but the next video. Although I think we are talking about the Bi Sisters video, which is what she made in response to the tides turning against her, let's be honest. Later, Tati would come forward professing that the reason she reacted the way that she did was because of what Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson had filled her head with about James. In essence, they turned her against him and her actions were merely based on the information they gave her. When releasing this later video, she essentially shifted the blame and all responsibility on Shane and Jeffree, accusing them of being the reason why everything went down like it did. Now, to give you a little bit of context, we do have to address what the first video was. In response to everything sort of going to pot, she released her video. It was either Bi Sister or Bi Sisters, which was basically a 40-something long video calling out James's bad behavior. And we're not talking, oh, bad behavior. We're talking accusations of, which is where the title of this particular segment gets its name, where it is no longer about drama. It isn't drama anymore. It becomes something more serious. Now, while I absolutely believe that Shane and Jeffree were highly instrumental in the way that all of this played out, I do not think that Tati is nearly as blameless as she would like you to believe. You have got to understand that throughout this entire thing, James is very young in comparison to his YouTube counterparts, basically a child among full-grown adults with many more years of experience in the industry than him. They know how to work the system, how to do damage control, and what to say when things were not entirely in their favor. So for Tati to come out and say she was essentially backed into a position where she had to do what she did is a little bit unbelievable, irresponsible, and very calculated. It wasn't so much about the truth anymore, so much as covering her and making herself the victim when she had an active role in making the situation what it was. I was never a Tati stan, but I enjoyed her videos and her seemingly unbiased nature when talking about products and making reviews. However, after that incident, I developed a dislike for her simply because she seemed to lack the ability to accept responsibility for her actions. Yes, she apologized, but it was exceptionally after the fact and done in a manner that seemed meant to damn other people instead of actually owning up to the entirety of what she did. But more on that later. With everyone divided and public opinion swaying rampant like palm trees in a hurricane, the silence needed to be broken somehow. And Tati decided to film, edit, and upload a video very iconically titled "Bye Sister." This video has since been privated, unlisted, or deleted. I'm not a drama channel, so I don't have any kind of receipts proving that. But when I went to look for the video, it wasn't there anymore. Her newer video is still up. I will leave that link down below. And I mean, let's just say the "Bye Sister" video, it is a understatement, an absurd understatement to say that this video shook the drama and beauty community of YouTube to its absolute core. This video, you have to understand in context of this video being made. Tati had an incredibly established presence on the platform, and she had an established presence of someone who was unproblematic. Basically, she was someone who was very sincere. She was someone who you wouldn't doubt. You know, she would say something, you'd be like, yeah, Tati's given me no reason to not believe her. Why would she lie? You know, it was sort of that relationship with her viewers that she banked on when making this video, because she would inevitably come out as the honest looking one. That's just the situation that we were in. And to a certain degree, this video truly seemed to be the end of James Charles's career. But we would later learn that everything was not all as it seemed to be. Firstly, I think that it is important at this point to mark the distinction between drama and actual illegal activity. I feel that amidst the flurry of cancel culture masquerading as accountability culture, communities tend to hyper-focus on the sensationalism of it all. We become more focused about addressing the issues, sharing our opinions, and creating content off of it instead of focusing on it as a concept outside of YouTube. Like, there are more ramifications to these actions than just being talked about on YouTube. These situations are so much more than just content for drama channels, and I will be the first to admit my faults. As much as I enjoy sharing my opinion on all things beauty related, there comes a point when it isn't my place, and I absolutely despise the fact that I made so many videos discussing this entire situation, especially since I was so uninformed. Because all we can do is speculate based on the partial information we have. Yes, I have thoughts and opinions, and I like using my platform to express them, but after a while, I got tired of trying to stay on top of everything and comment on every single thing that happened. I will continue to talk about these things, obviously, but I want them to be research-based rather than just spur-of-the-moment videos created to take advantage of the situations for views and subs. After this video, I have decided that I'm actually going to be deleting videos pertaining to James Charles or Tati and this entire situation, because I don't feel that I really have the right to have discussed them in the manner that I did. I have no degrees. I have no insightful evidence. You know, it was just me speculation, basically being like, yeah, James is stupid. James is a little twit. You know, it was basically that kind of energy, and I don't want to have that kind of energy anymore. Everything began spiraling out of control at this point and became a bloodbath. There were watch parties where people would literally just watch and celebrate while James Charles' subscriber count went down. And actually, as a result of those, that's why Social Blade now doesn't let you see in real time every single subscriber, because there were so many people just going on and being like, woo, his career is ended, yay! You know, we had pitchforks and, like, you know, torches all out. We were ready. This train wreck, it was just a whole mob mentality to the very truest form. And as a result of this, obviously, Tati's count grew up. Jeffree wasn't necessarily a huge key player in this situation. He was sort of a off person. You know, he was showing his support for her, tweeting when she hit a new subscriber hallmark and all of that sort of thing. He wasn't necessarily involved, you know, in the whole, you know, Tati did her video. You know, you would think that she had done it out of her own volition and at the time wasn't being influenced by Shane or Jeffree, which is partly why I sort of call into question her then later putting on the majority of responsibility for that content onto them. For a brief moment in time, Tati managed to completely turn the tides of public opinion and manipulated her embarrassing betrayal into something that ultimately benefited her. Tati, Shane, and Jeffree became the holy trinity of the beauty community, rising up from James's ashes and taking place as top-tier creators who told it like it was and held their personal morals higher than anything else. But did they really? At the time, I feel like it was so easy to get super hyped up. Like this really was a big thing within the community. As popular as James was, he had the sort of equal same amount of fervor of people who were against him. Kind of in the same way of Jeffree Star, where you had those die-hard people, and then you had those people who wished him nothing but ill will. And because of that, it was really a powerful moment that the opinion was able to be swayed so significantly. That's why I cannot think that everything that Tati did was not at least somewhat calculated, okay? She claimed she was coming from a true emotional whatever sort of situation. This was from the heart and I just have to put the truth out there and get everything there, you know? And are any of the things about James true? I don't know. We probably never will know. And to a certain degree, it is none of our business, which is why I feel so bad about making those videos about him and basically just, you know, I was basically accusing him just as much. But I don't think it was this entire, like I said, you don't get where you are, where she is, without having know-how, without knowing the system, without knowing about lawyers, without knowing about contingency, you know. I just don't think it was oh, well, I guess I'm going to do this because of emotions. I mean, I'm sure emotion was involved, but she was coming from a place that wasn't just emotional. She was coming from a place that was going to make the situation better for her. I took part in this as well, creating a few videos for those sweet clicks and wanting to present my thoughts. And I will admit that I was all too happy to share my personal opinion on James. I did and pretty much still do not like him. I still believe he is an entitled and spoiled individual who believes he can do no wrong and cannot be touched no matter what he does. He really grates on me in all the wrong ways, but that's fine. All I have to do is not watch his content. Problem solved. I just wanted to state that just because I am not personally a fan of his and believe that he has many problematic faults, that is not enough of a reason to literally try to destroy someone. And I honestly feel terrible for feeding into that sort of rhetoric. I have learned that just because I have an opinion on something doesn't mean that it is warranted, necessary, or helpful. Things got to the point that nothing said by anyone who was involved actually helped the situation. It just fanned the flames and created even more controversy and polluted the chain of information to the point that no one knew who was actually in the right, what was the truth, and who was trying to cover their assets. Tati presented herself as the ultimate victim. Backstabbed by the young man she and her husband had taken under their wings and ultimately helped get him to where he was in his career. One of the most popular beauty gurus on the platform. Apologies were made. Everyone made vague tweets about the situation, or not so vague ones, like when Jeffree called James a... Now, this is a part of Jeffree's involvement that I do want to touch on, because I understand free speech. We're all allowed to say whatever we like, but at the same time, the gift of free speech also comes with the responsibility of using it responsibly. Now, that is something I wanted to highlight because I think it is now important to address one of the main issues that was sort of glossed over or lost in translation during the actual turn of events. And something I was unfortunately willing to let lay by the wayside during my own videos. At the time of this incident, James was only 20. I don't know about any of y'all, but looking back when I was 20, I wasn't exactly the epitome of mature or responsible. An important contrast is the ages of those other people involved. Jeffree was 34, Tati was 37, and Shane was 31. In terms of age, 3 fully developed adults who were all instrumental in attempting to take down a child for whatever reason, jealousy, revenge, or just plain pettiness as a means to remove competition off of the platform. These 3 people who all have 10 plus years of experience either in this industry or their own business. They knew exactly what they were doing. I feel like when it comes to this, there cannot be a case filed for ignorance. The events of Dramageddon 2 were a calculated attempt at usurping the power and popularity of someone nearly half their age. These were grown-ass adults who accused James of being someone who had committed. And this is where it stops being drama. It isn't about vitamins. It isn't about popularity. It isn't about any of that. When you actually go as far as as Jeffree did in his tweets and as Tati did in her video to accuse someone. We're not alluding to it. We're not saying maybe this happened. To literally come out and say, I witnessed this person doing this. That ends people's careers. That ends people's lives. That isn't drama. That isn't about any of these little things. And I feel that at that point of accusation, it should have just been stopped. People needed to stop feeding into the fire because God forbid if it was true, something needed to be done about that. And if it wasn't true, something needs to be done about people who are coming out and just accusing. Drama is when one beauty person shades someone else's palette, you know? What isn't drama are allegations of abuse. Blows my mind. I am disgusted about how I responded to the whole situation when I first went, because I was like, yeah, he's a terrible human being. And I'm like, no. Well, I don't know if he's not a terrible human being. This is where opinion no longer matters. It isn't about throwing shade or being brutally honest because you tell it how it is. It has now become a legal matter because those accusations, no matter how they are presented, can absolutely destroy someone. At this point, who cares that James was wearing a Balenciaga jacket hoodie when he was stalked by the press shortly after the allegations came out? This whole thing, it just blew my mind. Like, thinking about how I acted in the beginning of it and looking at it now as I'm making this video, I'm like, how come this wasn't what people were concerned about? How come people were like, oh, we need to get James off the streets? Because it's a true testament of when someone says something, how quickly they're believed. We didn't have any evidence. We had Tati's word, which was happening after she'd been slighted by James. I'm not a lawyer, but I feel like legally this whole case would have fallen apart. It isn't drama. It is a very serious situation that, in my opinion, should have changed the entire outlook of how this was handled, because my opinion absolutely does not matter when it comes to something like this. I cannot speculate on legal accusations because it isn't about what I think anymore. This was a dangerous move that then became a slippery slope fueled by the current distaste for James. It just sort of really frustrated me as I was making all my notes and doing my research and kind of recounting the situation in my head, how much Tati and James and Shane were able to get away with. At that point, it isn't just YouTube. At that point, it becomes so much more than a little bit of vitamin drama. You are talking not just about someone's YouTube reputation, about something that could get them sent to jail. All in all, I just feel that the older individuals involved should have received more backlash for the defamation and accusation they made. To me, it didn't matter that they made apologies either as videos, tweets, or an Instagram story or Snapchat. This goes beyond an apology for saying something especially rude or mean to someone. It is a sexual assault claim that carries with it a potential ramification of 20 years in prison. It is real, It is awful, and it is so much more than being upset about lost vitamin sales. It's one of those things where I just feel it definitely was more than it seemed. I keep going back to the whole concept and idea that a lot of this was calculated, and I do keep bringing up James's age because he was 20. Dude couldn't even legally drink yet, and they're out here accusing him of this. Not saying that people can't do that when they don't legally drink. Y'all know what I mean, I hope. But this whole thing, looking back on it, just really left a foul taste in my mouth that there wasn't more done against Tati, against Shane, and against Jeffree. Not for the things that they got whatever for, but for just that whole thing right now. I feel like that's when it should have stopped. That's when it wasn't drama. That's when it became a legal matter. You know, drama channels, whatever. Don't talk about it anymore. It's time to step back. It has gone beyond what it initially was. I'm actually going to stop it right here at this point. This video is already freakishly long. I do hope that any of y'all have made it to this one. I think this one was better than the first one. When we go into the next video, we will discuss sort of the beginning of the end for Jeffree Star's untouchable popularity. We will also be discussing Tati's newest video concerning the James Charles situation. And I will also reiterate some points that I made in this video, sort of giving it a finishing up in the next one. I want to thank you all so much for allowing me to do this passion project here. This is something that I wouldn't have been able to accomplish without your support and your love and your understanding. This sort of in-depth, talky, kind of psychological video, this is truly where a lot of my passion lies. And once again, I just thank you guys so much for allowing me to do it. I hope you enjoyed this video and at least got something from it. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you. And as always, keep it real. Mwah.